The driveway glistened under the evening sun, dark and slick where it should have been bone dry. Ray Porter cut the engine at 6:15 on a Thursday, the kind of quiet suburban evening where sprinklers tick and doors slam with the rhythm of families settling in for dinner. Then he saw the shape against the garage door. His daughter, 18 years old, and folded in on herself like something discarded, her hair a wet tangle across her face, each breath a ragged whisper. Water pooled around her in strange patterns, too much of it, spreading toward the street in slow rivulets. Her phone lay face up on the concrete, cracked glass catching the dying light. Ray's hands were steady when he lifted her. They had been steady for 18 years, through every choice that brought him here, to this ordinary house on this ordinary street. But someone had just torn through that carefully built piece. They had no idea what they'd awakened. The red spray paint across his front door dripped like a fresh wound. 36 hours. Ray carried his daughter inside, her weight familiar in his arms the way violence once was. And somewhere in the growing dark, someone was about to learn what happens when you touch what a dangerous man loves most. The emergency room lights were too bright, the kind that made everything look exposed and raw. Ray sat in a plastic chair outside the examination room, his work boots leaving muddy prints on the sterile floor. His hands rested on his knees, palms up, and he stared at them like they belonged to someone else. Calloused from years of construction work, scarred from accidents with power tools and rough lumber. They looked like a working man's hands. They had not always been that way. Cassie had regained consciousness in the ambulance, coughing water that should not have still been in her lungs. The paramedics said she was lucky, that whoever did this had stopped just short of killing her. Ray had nodded, said nothing, kept his face carefully blank the way he had learned to do a long time ago. Lucky was not the word that came to his mind. Lucky was what happened when you found a $20 bill in an old jacket. This was something else entirely. The doctor emerged at 7:30, a young woman with tired eyes and a clipboard clutched against her chest. Cassie would be fine, she said. Bruised ribs, some water in the lungs, mild hypothermia from the shock. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Ray thanked her, his voice steady and polite, the voice of a concerned father who trusted the system to protect his child. Inside, something very old and very cold was waking up, stretching muscles that had gone soft with disuse. He went in to see Cassie. She lay propped against white pillows, an oxygen tube beneath her nose, her face pale, except for the purple bruising along her jaw. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. Ray crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV line taped to her wrist. She tried to speak, but he shook his head gently. Not yet. Just rest. But Cassie gripped his hand hard, her voice a harsh whisper that cut through the steady beep of monitors. 3 of them, she said. They were waiting when I got home from work. Said I was a message. Said you'd understand. Her breath hitched. And Ray felt something crack deep in his chest, the kind of breaking that happened slowly and all at once. They had a camera, Dad. They filmed the whole thing. Said they'd post it if you didn't. She could not finish. Ray leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, the way he used to when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. I understand, he said quietly. And he did. This was not random. This was deliberate. Someone knew who he was, or who he had been. Someone had done their homework. The spray paint on his door, the 36-hour deadline, the calculated cruelty of using Cassie as leverage. This was personal. Ray straightened up, smoothed his daughter's hair back from her face, and made his voice as calm as Sunday morning. You're safe now? I'm going to take care of this. Cassie searched his face, and for a moment, she looked like she was seeing him for the first time. Dad, what's going on? Why would anyone do this to us? Ray had no good answer for that. Not one he could give her in a hospital room with nurses passing in the hallway. So he did what he had done for 18 years. He protected her from the truth. He kissed her forehead, promised he would be back before morning, and walked out before she could ask more questions. The night air hit him like a fist when he stepped outside. Ray stood in the hospital parking lot, surrounded by cars and the distant wail of sirens, and let himself feel it. The rage. It came up from somewhere deep, a red thing with teeth that he had locked away the night his wife died and his daughter was born. The night he had realized that being a fighter meant Cassie would grow up without a father. One way or another, he had chosen her, chosen this quiet life, and someone had just thrown that choice back in his face. Ray pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he had not called in 15 years. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "This is Porter," Ray said. "I need information." There was a long pause on the other end, the sound of a man rearranging his understanding of the world. Then, "Jesus, Ray. Thought you were dead." Ray's laugh was dry and humorless. "So did I. Not anymore." The address came through 20 minutes later, an industrial district on the south side, the kind of place where people minded their own business and nobody called the cops when they heard shouting. Ray drove with the windows down, letting the cold October wind clear his head. He needed to be smart about this, needed to think like the man he used to be, the one who studied opponents and found weaknesses and never, ever let emotion dictate strategy. But that man had not had a daughter. That man had not known what it felt like to hold your whole world in your arms and feel her heart beat against yours, while a doctor listed her injuries in a calm, clinical voice. The warehouse district was dark, except for the sodium lights spaced every 50 yards along the cracked pavement. Ray parked 2 blocks away and walked, his boots silent on the sidewalk. He had dressed differently before leaving the hospital, trading his work clothes for dark jeans and a black jacket that hung loose enough to hide movement. Old habits. He felt ridiculous, like he was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But then he thought of Cassie's face, the purple bruises and the fear in her eyes, and the ridiculousness fell away. This was who he needed to be tonight. The building matched the address, a 3-story brick structure with most of its windows boarded over. Light leaked from the ground floor, and Ray could hear music, the bass-heavy thump of something aggressive and mindless. He circled the building once, noting exits and blind spots, the way his old trainer had taught him to read a ring before stepping into it. Front door, side entrance, fire escape on the east wall. 3 ways in, 3 ways out. Always know your exits. Always have a plan. Ray chose the side entrance, a metal door with a broken lock that opened with a push. Inside, the hallway smelled like mold and stale beer. The music was louder here, coming from somewhere ahead and to the left. He moved toward it, his breathing controlled, his heartbeat steady. This was the part he remembered, the strange calm that came over him before a fight. The world narrowed to simple things: distance, timing, the space between one breath and the next. The main room opened up before him, a converted loading dock with stained concrete floors and metal beams overhead. A dozen people scattered around, some sitting on old couches, others standing in groups. The music came from a speaker propped in the corner. And there, near the back, 3 young men stood around a folding table, passing a phone between them and laughing. Ray recognized the scene they were watching: his driveway, his daughter, the pressure hose. He recognized their faces too, now that he saw them. The one holding the phone had an eagle tattooed on his neck. The second wore a red hoodie. The third, smaller than the others, had a nervous energy that made him shift his weight from foot to foot. Ray stepped into the light. The music covered his approach, and it took several seconds before someone noticed him. A woman on one of the couches glanced up, did a double take, and nudged the man beside her. The words spread like ripples in water. Heads turned. The conversation died. The three men by the table looked up, and Ray saw the exact moment they recognized him. The phone dropped. The eagle tattoo's smile faltered. And Ray Porter, 52 years old, construction worker, single father, keeper of a life built on careful choices, let them see what he had been keeping locked away. "I'm looking for someone," he said quietly. His voice carried in the sudden silence. "Someone who thought it would be smart to hurt my daughter." He moved forward, slow and deliberate, closing the distance. The red hoodie stepped back. The nervous one looked toward the exits, but Eagle Tattoo straightened up, trying to salvage some dignity, some control. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of muscles that came from a gym rather than real work. He thought those muscles made him dangerous. "You must be Porter," the young man said. His voice was steady, but Ray heard the tremor underneath. "Vince said you'd come." Ray stopped 10 feet away. The name hit him like cold water, pulling memories up from deep places. Vince. He knew that name. Knew it in the way you know the taste of blood in your mouth or the sound of your own heartbeat. The room was watching now, everyone alert. Sensing the shift in the air, Ray kept his hands loose at his sides, his stance casual, but he was already calculating angles and distances. How many people who might intervene, how quickly he could move if he needed to. "Where is he?" Ray asked. Eagle Tattoo's smile came back, but it was uglier now, meaner. "Somewhere you can't touch him, but he wants you to know he's got something of yours. Insurance, he called it." The phone on the table buzzed, the screen lighting up with a new message. Eagle Tattoo picked it up, glanced at it, and turned it toward Ray. The image made his blood go cold. Cassie's hospital room. Someone had been inside, had gotten close enough to photograph her sleeping. The oxygen tube still in place, her face turned toward the camera. The timestamp said, 9:23. 17 minutes ago. Ray's vision tunneled. The room fell away except for the three men in front of him and the phone screen glowing with his daughter's face. Every instinct screamed at him to run back to the hospital, to put himself between Cassie and whoever had violated that space. But his feet stayed planted, because running was what they wanted. This was the trap, the leverage, the way to keep him paralyzed and afraid. Ray looked up from the phone, met Eagle Tattoo's eyes, and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just made a decision that would cost him something, but cost his enemies everything. "Tell Vince," Ray said quietly, "that he made a mistake." Then he moved. 18 years of rust meant nothing when muscle memory took over. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The shift of weight, the snap of hip and shoulder. The precise angle that turned a punch into something devastating. Eagle Tattoo went down hard, blood spraying from his nose before he hit the concrete. The red hoodie lunged forward, and Ray sidestepped, caught him with an elbow to the temple that dropped him like a stone. The nervous one tried to run, but Ray was faster, catching him by the collar and slamming him against the brick wall hard enough to knock the wind out. The whole thing took maybe 6 seconds. The room erupted into chaos, people scrambling away, someone yelling. Ray ignored them. He leaned close to the nervous one, who was gasping like a fish out of water, eyes wide with terror. "The hospital," Ray said softly. "Who did he send?" The young man shook his head, tried to speak, failed. Ray slammed him against the wall again. Not hard enough to cause real damage, but hard enough to clarify priorities. "Tell me now, or I start breaking things." "Paulson," the kid gasped. "Big guy, bald, scar on his cheek. He's just watching her, man. Just making sure you behave." Ray let him drop and stepped back. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up to decision. He looked around the room at the faces staring back, seeing fear and shock and the beginning of respect. None of them would forget this. Word would spread, and that was exactly what he needed. Ray walked out the way he came in, nobody trying to stop him. His phone buzzed with a text from his old contact. More info on Vince. Not good, Ray. Call me. But Ray did not call. He drove back to the hospital, parked in the visitor lot, and walked through the main entrance like any other concerned father coming to check on his child. The security guard at the desk nodded to him. The elevator music was something soft and meaningless, and when he reached Cassie's floor, he found what he was looking for. The man sat in a chair outside Cassie's room, a newspaper folded in his lap, his bulk making the furniture look like it belonged in a dollhouse. Bald head, scar bisecting his left cheek, hands that could palm a basketball. He looked up when Ray approached, and something like recognition flickered across his face. Ray stopped in front of him, close enough to make it uncomfortable, far enough to maintain plausible deniability if a nurse walked by. "You're going to leave," Ray said quietly. "You're going to tell Vince that his insurance policy just expired. And you're going to pray that when I find him, I'm in a forgiving mood." Paulson stood slowly, unfolding himself to his full height. He had 4 inches and maybe 60 pounds on Ray. In his younger days, Ray would have seen that as a challenge. Now he saw it as physics. Bigger meant slower. Heavier meant less endurance. Intimidation meant reliance on fear rather than skill. "Vince said you'd probably show up," Paulson said. His voice was surprisingly soft. "Said to give you a message. He's got your girl's schedule, her work address, her favorite coffee shop. Says 36 hours was generous. Now it's 30. Ray felt the anger spike again, hot and immediate, but he forced it down. Losing control was what they wanted. Emotion made you sloppy. He needed to be precise. "You tell Vince I'll meet him, wherever he wants, whenever he wants. Just him and me. And you tell him if anything else happens to my daughter, there won't be anywhere he can hide." Ray's voice stayed level, almost conversational, but something in his eyes made Paulson take a step back. The big man nodded slowly, gathered his newspaper, and walked away without another word. Ray watched him go, counted to 30, then slipped into Cassie's room. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, tears running silently down her face. Ray's heart broke a little more. He pulled the chair close to her bed and took her hand. "Did someone come in here?" he asked gently. Cassie nodded. "Big guy. Said he was hospital security checking the rooms. But he looked at me weird, Dad. Like he knew me." She turned her head to look at him, and in her eyes, Ray saw the question she was afraid to ask. "Something happened a long time ago," Ray said slowly. "Before you were born. I was a different person then." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I hurt someone. Not on purpose. Not like it was in a fight. A sanctioned fight. But he got hurt badly, and he died. His son blames me." Ray watched his daughter process this, saw the confusion and fear, and something else, something that looked almost like understanding. "The men who hurt me," Cassie whispered. "They work for him?" Ray nodded. "His name is Vince. He's been planning this for a long time, and I'm going to end it." Cassie's grip tightened on his hand. "How?" Ray smiled, and this time it was genuine, if sad. "By doing what I should have done 18 years ago. By facing it instead of running away." They sat together in silence for a while, the monitors beeping their steady rhythm, the hospital settling into its night routine. Finally, Cassie spoke again. "What were you, Dad? Before?" Ray thought about lying, about keeping that last piece of his old life buried. But she deserved the truth. He owed her that much. "I was a fighter. Kickboxing, mostly. Underground circuits. Some legitimate tournaments. They called me the Reaper." He laughed softly at the melodrama of it. Stupid name. But I was good. Really good. Good enough that people paid to watch me hurt other people. Why did you stop? Cassie asked. Ray looked at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused, hers young and smooth except for the IV line. Your mother, he said simply. She was pregnant with you, and I had a fight. A big one. Championship level. My opponent was younger, hungry, maybe a little reckless. I caught him with a combination that should have just ended the fight. But something went wrong. He went down hard, hit his head. Never woke up. The memory was as clear as yesterday. The sound of the impact, the sudden silence of the crowd, the way the other fighter's eyes had gone empty. He died 3 days later, Ray continued. Brain hemorrhage. The doctor said it was a pre-existing condition, that any hit might have triggered it. The commission cleared me. But his son was at that fight, 8 years old, watching his father die because of me. Ray's voice cracked. And that same night, the hospital called. Your mother had gone into labor early. Complications. By the time I got there, you were born and she was gone. They let me hold you, this tiny thing, and all I could think was that I'd traded one life for another. That the universe was balancing the books. Cassie was crying openly now, but she did not let go of his hand. So you quit. You gave it all up for me. Ray nodded. Best decision I ever made. You were worth every single day, every choice, every moment. But I thought I could leave that life behind completely. Thought, if I just kept my head down, worked hard, raised you right, the past would stay buried. He looked at his daughter, memorized her face, the way parents do when they are afraid. I was wrong. Vince found me. And now I have to finish what I started 18 years ago. The next morning, Ray's phone buzzed with coordinates and a time, 11 p.m., an abandoned factory on the river. Come alone. Ray spent the day making arrangements. He called the hospital, made sure they would not release Cassie until he gave the word. He called his foreman, took a few days off. He drove to a storage unit across town, one he had rented 18 years ago and maintained ever since, even though he told himself he would never need it again. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were the pieces of his old life. Hand wraps, shin guards, the gloves he had worn in his last fight, still stained with someone else's blood. Ray brought them home, set them on the kitchen table, and stared at them for a long time. They looked smaller than he remembered, less impressive, just equipment. But when he picked up the hand wraps and wound them around his knuckles, muscle memory took over. The familiar pressure, the way the fabric locked his wrists into alignment, the transformation of his hands into weapons. He stretched, testing his range of motion, feeling where 18 years had tightened his muscles and stiffened his joints. He was not 25 anymore. But he did not need to be. He just needed to be good enough. The afternoon stretched long and strange. Ray cleaned the house, washed dishes, vacuumed carpets, as if preparing for guests who would never arrive. He cooked a meal he did not eat. He sat in Cassie's room and looked at the childhood photos still tacked to her bulletin board. Birthday parties, school plays, the two of them at the state fair when she was 9, both grinning at the camera with cotton candy. He tried to memorize them, just in case. At 6, he showered. At 7, he dressed in clothes that would not restrict movement. At 8, he sat down and wrote a letter to Cassie, sealed it in an envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter where she would find it if things went wrong. The drive to the factory took 40 minutes. Ray arrived early, parked a block away, and walked the perimeter. The building was a skeleton of its former self, windows blown out, roof partially collapsed, the kind of place the city had forgotten about. But there was fresh graffiti on the walls, evidence of recent use. People came here, which meant witnesses, or at least the possibility of them. Ray filed that away. The main entrance was a loading bay with the door hanging off its hinges. He slipped inside, let his eyes adjust to the gloom. The interior was a maze of corridors and empty rooms, debris scattered everywhere. Ray moved carefully, testing the floor before committing his weight, listening for any sound that did not belong. The coordinates led him to what had once been the main production floor, a vast space with a high ceiling and industrial skylights that let in slashes of moonlight. And there, standing in the center of the floor like he owned it, was Vince. He was tall, lean, with his father's bone structure and the kind of face that made people uncomfortable. Sharp angles, cold eyes, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile genuinely. He wore dark clothes that fit too well to be casual, and when he moved, there was a predator's grace to it. This was not some street thug playing tough. This was someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Ray felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air coming through the broken windows. "Mr. Porter," Vince said. His voice echoed in the empty space. "Thank you for coming. I was worried you might disappoint me." Ray stepped into the light, his hands loose at his sides. "You wanted to talk. I'm here. Let's talk." Vince laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Talk? No. I think we're past talking. You see, I've spent 18 years thinking about you, dreaming about this moment. Do you know what it's like to watch your father die in front of thousands of people? To see him fall and never get back up?" "Yes," Ray said quietly. "I know exactly what that's like, because I was there too, and I've carried it every day since." Vince's expression flickered, something like surprise or maybe anger. "You carried it. You went home that night. You moved on, built yourself a nice little life while my father rotted in the ground and I grew up alone." His voice rose, bouncing off the walls. "You don't get to claim you suffered. You don't get to pretend this hurt you." Ray shook his head. "I'm not pretending. What happened to your father was a tragedy, but it was an accident. He knew the risks. We both did. That's what we signed up for." Vince took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "An accident? You put him in a coma with your bare hands. That's not an accident. That's murder. And you just walked away." The word hung in the air between them. Murder. Ray felt the weight of it, the accusation he had never quite let himself believe, but had never quite dismissed either. "What do you want, Vince?" Ray asked. "What's the end game here? You hurt my daughter to get to me. Fine. I'm here. So what now?" Vince smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. "Now? Now you fight me, the same way you fought my father. No rules. No referee, no mercy. You win, you and your daughter walk away. I never bother you again." He paused, let the implications settle. "You lose, well, let's just say your daughter will finally understand what it feels like to lose a parent." The threat was clear, and Ray felt the rage build again, hot and dangerous. But underneath it was something else, a cold, calculating part of him that was already working through scenarios, assessing Vince's stance, the way he held his weight, the tension in his shoulders. This was not just revenge, this was a challenge. Vince wanted to prove something, to himself, if not to the world. He wanted to beat Ray Porter the same way his father had failed to. "Just us?" Ray asked. "No tricks? No backup?" Vince spread his hands. "Just us. Man to man. The way it should have been 18 years ago." Ray nodded slowly. He could walk away, could call the police, press charges, hide behind the law, and hope it protected Cassie. But Vince had already proven he could reach her anywhere, and the law was slow, tangled, unreliable. This ended here, tonight, one way or another. Ray stripped off his jacket, let it fall to the floor. He flexed his hands, rolled his shoulders, felt his body remember patterns it had practiced 10,000 times. They circled each other in the moonlight, two men separated by a generation, and a tragedy that had shaped them both. Vince moved first, a testing jab that Ray slipped easily. Too eager. The boy was fast, trained, but he was fighting angry. Ray had spent 18 years learning patience, learning control. He waited. Let Vince come to him. The next combination was more serious. Jab, cross, low kick. Ray blocked the punches, checked the kick, and countered with a quick jab that snapped Vince's head back. First blood. Vince's lips split, a thin line of red that looked black in the shadows. They traded blows back and forth, feeling each other out. Vince was younger, faster, his cardio better. But Ray had experience, the kind that came from years of reading opponents and finding the gaps in their defense. He could see Vince's patterns emerging, the way he dropped his right hand after throwing a combination, the slight telegraph before his kicks. Ray filed it all away, waiting for the right moment. The fight intensified. Vince landed a solid body shot that made Ray's ribs scream. Ray responded with a leg kick that buckled Vince's knee, sent him stumbling. They broke apart. Breathing hard, reassessing. "You're slower than you were," Vince panted. "Old man." Ray smiled grimly. "Maybe. But I don't need to be fast. I just need to be smarter." He moved in, feinted high, went low with a sweep that took Vince's legs out from under him. Vince hit the ground hard but rolled away, came up in a defensive stance. Ray saw the flash of fear in the boy's eyes, the realization that this was not going the way he had planned. Good. Fear made people careless. Fear made them desperate. Vince charged, abandoning technique for raw aggression. Ray sidestepped, caught him with an elbow to the jaw that sent him sprawling. Vince got up slower this time, blood streaming from his nose, one eye already swelling shut. But he kept coming. Ray had to give him that. The kid had heart, just like his father. The thought brought a pang of something complicated, regret mixed with resignation. This should not be happening. This was a cycle that should have broken 18 years ago. But here they were, repeating history, unable to escape it. "Your father was a good man," Ray said between breaths. "He didn't deserve what happened to him, but neither do you, neither does Cassie. This has to stop, Vince, right here, right now." Vince spat blood, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It stops when you're dead. That's the only way this ends." He lunged again, and this time Ray did not dodge. He stepped into the attack, caught Vince's arm, and used the boy's momentum against him, throwing him hard into the concrete floor. Vince's head bounced, and he lay still for a moment, dazed. Ray stood over him, chest heaving, knuckles split and bleeding. He could end it now. One more strike, precisely placed, and Vince would not get up. It would be justified. Self-defense, protecting his daughter. But as he raised his fist, he saw not Vince's face, but the face of the boy's father, the man he had killed 18 years ago. And he saw Cassie, 8 years old, standing in this same spot, watching her father become a killer. The choice crystallized in that moment, sharp and painful. He could win this fight and lose himself. Or he could lose the fight and maybe, somehow, win something more important. Ray lowered his fist. He stepped back. Vince groaned, pushed himself up on his elbows, confusion and pain warring on his face. "Get up," Ray said. "I'm not going to kill you." Vince stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "What?" Ray extended a hand. "I said get up." "This is over." Vince looked at the offered hand, then at Ray's face, searching for the trick, the trap. "You're letting me go?" His voice was small, lost. "No," Ray said. "I'm asking you to stop. Your father's death was a tragedy, but killing me won't bring him back, and hurting Cassie won't heal your pain. It will just create more of it. More grief, more rage, more people carrying scars they didn't ask for." He kept his hand extended. "I can't undo what happened, but I can stand here and tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry you lost your father. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. And I'm sorry that you've been carrying this alone for 18 years. Vince's face crumpled. The rage drained out of him, leaving something raw and broken in its place. "He was all I had," he whispered. "And you took him away." Ray nodded. "I know. And I took myself away from it too. I hid from what I'd done instead of trying to make it right. That was cowardly. But running away didn't fix anything. It just postponed this moment." He crouched down, bringing himself to Vince's level. "We can keep fighting. I'll probably win, because I've got more to lose. But even if I do, even if I walk out of here, this doesn't end. You'll find another way to hurt me, or I'll have to hurt you worse. And it will just keep going until someone really dies, or we can both choose to walk away." Vince shook his head, tears mixing with blood on his face. "I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to let it go." Ray understood. He had spent 18 years trying to let go and failing, carrying his guilt like a stone in his chest. "Maybe you don't let it go," he said. "Maybe you just learn to carry it differently. Find a way to honor your father that doesn't involve destroying yourself." He stood, offered his hand again. "I can't be your father, but I can tell you what I wish someone had told me. Your father would not want this. He was a fighter, yeah, but he was also a man who understood that some battles aren't worth winning." For a long moment, Vince just stared at the offered hand. Then, slowly, shakily, he reached up and took it. Ray pulled him to his feet, and they stood facing each other in the ruins of the old factory, two men bound by violence and grief and the possibility of something else. "I'm going to hold you to that," Vince said hoarsely. "If you're lying, if you go back to your life and forget about this, I will come back." Ray nodded. "I'm not lying, and I'm not forgetting. We're going to figure this out. Together." They walked out of the factory side by side, into the October night that had turned cold and clear. Ray's whole body hurt, ribs bruised, knuckles bleeding, a cut over his eye that would need stitches. But the weight he had been carrying for 18 years felt lighter somehow. Not gone. Never gone. But maybe finally, starting to shift into something he could bear. They stood by Ray's truck, neither quite ready to leave. "What now?" Vince asked. Ray thought about it. "Now I go back to the hospital, check on my daughter. Then maybe we sit down, have a conversation without trying to kill each other. You tell me about your father. I'll tell you about mine, and we figure out how to live with what happened." Vince nodded slowly. "And Cassie? Your daughter?" Ray's expression hardened slightly. "You never go near her again. That's non-negotiable. You want to hate me? Fine. But she's off limits. Permanently." Vince had the grace to look ashamed. "I shouldn't have involved her. That was wrong." Ray appreciated the admission, even if it could not undo the damage. "Yeah, it was. But we've all done things we regret. The question is what we do next." They exchanged numbers, made tentative plans to meet in a few days, and then Vince walked away into the darkness, a solitary figure with his father's face, and, maybe, the beginning of his own path. Ray watched him go, then climbed into his truck and drove back to the hospital. His hands shook on the steering wheel, adrenaline and emotion finally catching up to him. He had gambled everything on the hope that mercy was stronger than revenge. Time would tell if he had been right. Cassie was awake when he arrived, sitting up in bed with a book she was not really reading. She looked up when he came in, saw his battered face, and gasped, "Dad, oh my God." Ray waved off her concern. "I'm fine, it's over." He sank into the chair beside her bed, suddenly exhausted. "Vince and I came to an understanding. He's not going to bother us anymore." Cassie studied him, her eyes old beyond her 18 years. "You didn't kill him?" It was not a question. Ray shook his head. "No. I thought about it. But I realized that killing him would make me exactly what he thought I was. A monster. And I've spent 18 years trying to be better than that." Cassie reached out and took his hand, gentle with his split knuckles. "Mom would be proud of you." The words hit Ray harder than any punch Vince had thrown. He thought of his wife, the woman who had loved him despite knowing what he was capable of, who had believed he could be more than his worst moment. "I hope so," he said quietly. "I really hope so." They sat together in the hospital room, father and daughter, bound by blood and choice, and the understanding that sometimes the hardest fight is the one where you choose not to throw the punch. 8 months later, Ray stood in an empty storefront in a better part of town, surveying the space with a critical eye. It needed work, new floors, fresh paint, proper lighting. But the bones were good. High ceilings, lots of natural light, enough room for a proper training area. Cassie appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee, her limp almost gone now, just a slight hitch in her step when she was tired. "You really think this will work?" she asked. Ray took the coffee, sipped it, smiled. "Yeah, I do." The sign went up 3 weeks later, hand-painted by a local artist, the letters crisp against a pale blue background. Helen Porter's Boxing and Fitness, named after the woman who had brought them both into the world and left too soon. The grand opening was small, just friends and neighbors, but Ray watched Cassie lead a group of kids through their first lesson and felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. Vince showed up near the end, hesitant at the door, until Ray waved him in. They had met 6 times over the months, awkward conversations that slowly became easier, a friendship built on honesty and the shared understanding of loss. Vince had enrolled in community college, studying social work, trying to figure out how to help other kids who had lost parents. It was not a replacement for what he had lost, but it was something. "Place looks good," Vince said, looking around at the bright space, the heavy bags hanging from reinforced beams, the kids laughing as Cassie showed them how to stand. Ray nodded. "Thanks. You should come by sometime. Train with us." Vince looked startled, then thoughtful. "Yeah, maybe I will." They stood together watching Cassie work, and Ray thought about cycles and choices and the way violence could echo through generations unless someone chose to break the pattern. He had tried to break it by walking away, by hiding, but that had just delayed the inevitable. Real change required facing the past, acknowledging the damage, and choosing every single day to be better than your worst moment. Cassie called out, asking for help with a demonstration. Ray excused himself and crossed the floor to his daughter, who grinned at him and immediately tried to sweep his legs. He let her, going down in a controlled fall that made the kids laugh and applaud. From the floor, Ray looked up at his daughter's face, silhouetted against the fluorescent lights, and saw her mother's smile. And for the first time in 18 years, the grief did not swallow him. It was there. It would always be there. But so was this. His daughter, alive and strong. A gym full of kids learning that strength was not just about hitting harder, but about knowing when not to hit at all. And a young man at the door, his former enemy, who might someday become something like a friend. Ray got to his feet, brushed himself off, and went back to teaching. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary rhythms. Full of ordinary people, living ordinary lives, unaware of the small miracle happening in a converted storefront, where a father and daughter had decided that the past did not have to define the future. The weight Ray had carried for 18 years was still there, but now he was not carrying it alone, and that, he was learning, made all the difference. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the dust motes in golden shafts of light. Cassie demonstrated a proper guard position, her movements confident and sure. The kids mimicked her, their small fists raised in concentration. And Ray Porter, formerly known as the Reaper, now just a father trying to do better, watched over them all with a quiet pride that felt like redemption earned through the hardest kind of work. The daily choice to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of hurt, to love instead of hide. The spray-painted threat on his door had promised an ending. But standing here, in this place, named for the woman who had given them both everything, Ray understood that it had actually been a beginning, not the one he would have chosen. But maybe, just maybe, the one he needed.